Tennessee lost out on in-state 4-star offensive lineman Kamari Blair Wednesday night, who committed to South Carolina. Blair is a 4-star on 247 Sports Composite, a 4-star on 3 Composite, technically just a 3-star on 247 Sports, but he is an attendee of Kirkwood High School in Clarksville, Tennessee, weighs about 6'5.5" pounds stands at 6'5.5" pounds stands at 6'5.5", 281 pounds. He is in the 2026 recruiting class. The Vols do have 3 offensive linemen committed in their 2026 class so far. The headliner of those 3 is Gabriel Osenda, who is a borderline 5-star, depending on the service you go by. But Kamari Blair was one that they really expected to land. Again, he's from Clarksville. He's an in-state guy. It's one, typically when Tennessee has success, they have to go into South Carolina to raid players. But they don't expect to lose players in their area to South Carolina. Clarksville is not even in East Tennessee, where it would be close to South Carolina. Clarksville is in Montgomery County, which is on the border between Tennessee and Kentucky, west of Nashville, almost as far from South Carolina as you could possibly be, unless you go into the northwest corner of the state, to be fair. So taking that into account, it was definitely a surprise that Blair committed to South Carolina over Tennessee. So today's tough question is this: should Tennessee be worried about some of its losses on the recruiting trail? Now, there haven't been that many, but once you lose an in-state guy who is a highly touted guy, and you're Tennessee and you try to keep a lock on the state, you got to ask that question. That is today's tough question. It is brought to you by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorney. Play to win, why settle? Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones, banksandjones.com. Also, remember, we're live from the Ted Russell Ford Lincoln studio. Ted Russell Ford Lincoln is your home for the finest vehicles in Knoxville, new and used, East Tennessee's largest Ford and Lincoln volume dealer. So again, today's tough question: with Tennessee losing Kamari Blair to South Carolina, should the Vols be concerned about some of their recruiting losses? And I'm going to put that on the poll question real quick. So we're going to say, with Tennessee losing an in-state 4-star OL to South Carolina, should Vols be concerned? And we'll just say, or how about this? Should the Vols be concerned about losing out on a 4-star in-state offensive lineman to South Carolina? And it's a simple yes or no. You guys can vote on the poll question now. It is up, and give me your thoughts. Should the Vols be concerned about losing out on a 4-star in-state offensive lineman to South Carolina? I'm going to say yes. Kamari Blair is one of the best players in the state. Ole Miss was in the running for him too. I would have actually had him, if Tennessee was going to lose out on him, I would have predicted him to go to Ole Miss more than South Carolina, funny enough. Florida State, Kentucky, and Wisconsin were also in play. He was recently in Knoxville for a visit, saw Josh Heupel on June 20th, and that's the most recent visit he had of all of his schools. So with that in mind, you have to wonder, is this an issue? Is this a concern that Tennessee's losing out on him? I think so. This guy, his last visit was to Tennessee. He's an in-state guy. He's a highly touted guy. You would think you would trust Josh Heupel over Shane Beamer in terms of offensive lineman, but this comes into a real big question. It's something we've talked about on this show, which is that Josh Heupel has yet to start an offensive lineman that he signed out of high school, and he's entering year 5 at Tennessee. You don't think that's standing out to a guy like Kamari Blair? And if Tennessee has trouble recruiting offensive linemen because of that fact, things are only going to get worse going forward. So, you can bring out, and James Ferris says this, to be fair, says South Carolina had to fork out the money for a 4-star, not concerned. No one picks Beamer over Heupel. And Blind Squirrel Sports says, I begrudgingly agree with Caleb, but I also vote yes. And GBMFO says, does point out that they're on a recruiting tear and it isn't over. That's all fine. And I'm not knocking what you guys are saying, but specifically in the trenches, there are starting to be some questions raised about Tennessee recruiting offensive linemen. This year will be a big test for that, because Josh Heupel is going to have to start at least 2 linemen that he signed out of high school. And until then, you should get the top talent in the state. And Randy brings up a great point. Doesn't matter if you're Tennessee, you should get the top talent in the state. Very good point, Randy. And so I think you got to raise the question. Is it an overall recruiting concern or just the type of players Tennessee is recruiting, particularly on the offensive line? Because I got to be honest, if I'm an offensive lineman, I wouldn't commit to Tennessee out of high school. I just wouldn't. I mean, they haven't, again, nobody who has signed with Tennessee out of high school has started on the offensive line under Josh Heupel. Nobody who signed with Josh Heupel at Tennessee out of high school has started on the offensive line under Josh Heupel. That's a big deal. Today's Tough Question brought to you by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorney. Play to win. Why settle? Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. BanksandJones.com.
Why Banks & Jones? Well, it's because they're Tennessee's trial attorney. You can play to win with Banks & Jones because they'll go to trial. You've heard of other lawyers. They say they'll go to trial and fight for you. They won't. They just want to settle. That's the easiest way out. Well, that's not Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. They won't settle. They'll go to trial for you. Tennessee's trial attorney. They play to win. Truly, Tennessee's trial attorney when it comes to criminal defense or personal injury. Why settle? It's Banks & Jones. T. Scott Jones. BanksandJones.com.
The poll question is up. Should the Vols be concerned about losing out on a 4-star in-state offensive lineman in South Carolina? It is 50-50, yes and no. We're going to go to the message boards a little bit. GBMFO says that Tennessee just got an O-line commit. Maybe they have limited spots. Maybe he was no longer a priority. Yeah, but GBMFO, in today's day of recruiting, you don't have to worry about that as much with spots. You can kind of nudge guys out, particularly with the fact that it's more roster limits than scholarship limits on the recruiting trail. And at the same time, I don't think they would have gone for I don't think it would have gone for a couple of the linemen they got had they known they were going to land Kamari Blair. I mean, let's not forget that they have landed Gabriel Lucinda, who is a borderline 5-star, depending on where you go. I'll go ahead and call him a 5-star. He's a 5-star. That's fair. I can go ahead and just say Gabriel Lucinda is a 5-star. JB Shabazz is a fringe 4-star, but Edward Baker is a straight up 3-star. I'm telling you, they probably would have taken Kamari Blair over Edward Baker, despite Edward Baker's size at 335 pounds. So no, I got to be honest. I do really think this is a concern if you're Tennessee, and it's kind of going to be an issue. Adam says, how many 4 development projects do we really want so that they can transfer elsewhere later? Well, yeah, but then Tennessee signing 3-star linemen too. So we have to ask about that. Nathaniel Kim, if you're just jumping in, you said, which one do we miss out on? I thought we had commits already. I'm talking about Kamari Blair, who was an in-state 4-star offensive lineman committed to South Carolina. Derek, you're right about the stat with David Sanders. He's about to end that stat in 40 days of Josh Heupel not starting a guy that he signed out of high school on the offensive line at Tennessee. But David Sanders, at the same time, we don't know how good he'll be. And it won't just be David Sanders. Either William Satterwhite, Max Anderson, or somebody else is going to have to start in the middle too, even with Wendell Moe and Sam Pendleton. Dylan says he feels like in-state talent is completely overblown in today's age of NIL. He says, lock down your borders, but letting 1 or 2 slip through isn't that big of a deal anymore. Dylan, that's fair, but it kind of is for Tennessee. Tennessee at their peak, yes, they plucked guys out of Georgia, Ohio, Alabama, wherever, but they always secured in-state guys that really wanted to play for Tennessee. That really always stood out. Adam says 4-star linemen want big money, but they won't play for the first year or 2. Then you have to renegotiate when they are ready. You basically pay a kid to train and practice. Maybe that might be true with offensive linemen. That might be certainly true, particularly when offensive line is the hardest position to evaluate. It's the hardest position to project beyond even quarterback. So a lot of guys may not be so sure they'll make it to the NFL, particularly with them being injury prone. So if you're a highly touted offensive lineman, you may command some NIL money up front more than others. And that's probably fair.